A few years ago, I was looking for an interesting retirement project, and I was discussing writing a book on grandparenting with a helpful acquisition editor. She liked the topic, but not the framework that I was working on. And finally, she said to me, how about writing about grandparenting as a vocation, a Christian vocation? That immediately clicked with me, and I took off, and the outlines started coming very quickly. And it worked for two reasons. For one, it squared with my experience. I had resisted becoming a grandparent, approaching a 50th birthday, and being a grandparent at the same time just felt old. But a few weeks after my grandson was born, I saw him for the first time, and to say that we were melded together is to put it too tamely. For the whole time we were there, I was with him, holding him, watching his expressions, and I crumpled with sadness when we had to leave. Grandparent became an important part of the way I understood myself and how I cared about the future of my world. I wanted to grow into effective grandparenting. The other reason that this worked was that when I did my PhD dissertation, I wrote on the vocational dilemma of the late adolescent. And so to look at vocation from fairly early in life and fairly late in life felt like a worthwhile thing to do. So I will tell you, out of the many vocations or callings I discovered within the vocation of grandparent, I will tell you briefly about four of them. One is the vocation to be family ancestor, historian, storyteller, perhaps griot. I learned of Emory University researchers Marshall Duke and Robin Fivish, who had created a list of 20 questions about family story entitled, Do You Know? Such questions as, do you know where your grandparents grew up, where your parents grew up, how your parents met, the story of your birth? They discovered that as children learned more about their family's history, their sense of control of their lives became stronger. They learned their family story, perhaps a story like, we had our ups and downs, but we stuck together and overcame the difficulties, and thus developed what they called a strong intergenerational self. A second is the vocation call of some grandparents to be parent to my grandchildren. I didn't have this in my original proposal, but an evaluator said it's a growing trend and the book would be incomplete without it. I discovered a new term, alloparenting. Allo comes from Greek word for other, and alloparenting refers to a group of individuals who support and participate in caring for, educating, protecting each other's children. Alloparenting is not used of grandparents often, but I discovered a number of grandparents who were alloparents, so to speak, providing generous care for grandchildren, but not total. For example, there's many grandparents who provide child care in substantial portion for parents who cannot afford or cannot secure the care their children need. For others, usually a tragedy of some sort leaves a grandchild with no one else, and a grandparent becomes a permanent and total grandparent. One such grandparent, Deborah Doucette, writes, grandparents having to step in to raise their grandchildren is an enormous issue that permeates every segment of society, yet it's barely on anybody's radar screen. A third calling vocation is to planet and climate care. As I mentioned, I was nudged into caring more for the future of the world with my grandchildren. There are many ways to be concerned about the future of the world, and the one that cries out to me is climate. And I am called to teach my grandchildren, participate with them, and be with them so there'll be an habitable climate for their children and their grandchildren. The fourth vocation calling is calling to communicate about my faith and values. It's my longest chapter and has drawn the strongest interest. Two different individuals who do blogs on grandparenting have interviewed me about the book, and both spent a good bit of time on this chapter. one asked for a second session to talk just about this. Both of these bloggers particularly liked a section of that chapter and where I tell the stories of people who were impacted by their grandparents. There was physician Rachel Naomi Remen, who tells as a young child her favorite time of the week was Friday afternoons with her Jewish Orthodox rabbi grandpa, drinking sugary tea together, hearing his prayer for her, feeling completely known, safe, and loved. Theologian Yolanda Pierce speaks of grandmother theology, her praying, cake baking, foot washing grandma, and church mothers in a little Pentecostal church in Brooklyn. And Pierce wrote, "Nothing I have accomplished would be possible without her prayers." Cesar Chavez's grandma Tella taught his sister and him the catechism from their isolated country home, taught it so thoroughly the priest had no choice but to give them their first communion. And Russell Four Eagles, from age 5, lived with his Native American healer grandma, who constantly taught and mentored him to be a healer after her in a 200-generation succession, a path he has followed to this day. While this grandparent's spiritual influence has always been important, it's especially urgent today. The vast growth of nuns and duns is largest among the young, among our children and grandchildren. And quite possibly, if anyone among those young people are going to hear an alternative life view, an alternative way of life, other values and faith, they will hear it from their grandparents. Times together, shared meals, participating with grandparents in the grandparents' faith-based community service. Perhaps only there can be honest give and take in conversations. Well, that's a little about what I talk about, and it's been a pleasure to talk about it with you. I know.